Hello and welcome back, guys. We're now starting a new story, Crimson Caliber, by Random Bullshit 9. You can find author's profile link in the description. Let's begin. Bio name, Izumi Midoriya. Age, 15. Height, 160 centimeters, 5 feet 3 inches, weight, 54 kilograms, 119 pounds, BLD type, O, IQ, 145. Quirk, none, quirkless. Physical description, Izumi has a lean, toned build shaped by years of street brawls and combat drills. Her skin is pale, often bruised or scarred from constant confrontations. Despite her age, she is heavily tattooed black and crimson ink wind across her chest, back, and both arms, depicting dragons, oni masks, and traditional Yakuza motifs. Her most distinctive feature is her right eye, which is clouded and partially blind due to a gunshot wound sustained during a turf war. At age, she hides it beneath a dark contact lens or an eye patch on occasion. Her unruly green hair is dyed black with red streaks, and she often wears fingerless gloves, a bulletproof street jacket, and combat boots. Weapons: primary, pair of custom-made Remington New Model Army revolvers, refitted for modern munitions, engraved with floral Yakuza patterns and fitted with recoil suppressors. Secondary weapons: hidden boot knives, collapsible baton, modified smoke and flash grenades, concealed razor wire. Psychological profile: subject, Izumi Midoriya alias, Crimson Caliber, entered Yakuza at the age of 6 after disappearing from public record. Recruited by a mid-tier enforcer who saw potential in her cold detachment and aptitude for violence. Within a year, she had committed her first confirmed kill, an adult gang member twice her size. Over the next 9 years, she developed a reputation as a remorseless enforcer with sniper-like precision and unwavering loyalty to her syndicate family. Despite her violent history, Izumi displays no signs of psychopathy. She forms deep attachments with those she trusts, notably her adopted siblings, Hitoshi and Himiko, though she expresses affection in blunt or hostile ways. Displays anti-authority behavior, highly strategic thinking, and advanced situational awareness. She is considered emotionally closed off, sarcastic, and volatile when provoked. Izumi possesses a strong but warped moral compass. She loathes hypocrisy in heroes and operates on a strict personal code. Children, innocents, and civilians are off-limits. She is haunted by her past actions but suppresses guilt through denial and sarcasm. Counseling and trust building may assist in emotional reintegration, but she remains dangerous and unpredictable. Confidential, Hero Public Safety Commission File. Subject file, #2763-B, Crimson Caliber. Name, Izumi Midoriya. Aliases, Crimson Caliber, The Bloodshot Fawn, Yurei no Midoriya, The Ghost of Midoriya. Status, captured, pending rehabilitation program under UA surveillance. Affiliation, prior Eastern Tokyo Yakuza, Black Vein Syndicate. Known associates: Himiko Midoriya, formerly Himiko Toga, alias, Smiling Knife. Hitoshi Midoriya, formerly Hitoshi Shinso, alias, Echo Mind Bounty. Prior to capture, Crimson Caliber, 5 million yen. Status prior to capture, believed to be 19 to 21 years old. Classified as a top-tier armed threat, suspected of involvement in over 32 confirmed homicides, 14 arson cases, 5 high-profile robberies, and several unconfirmed syndicate executions. Primary enforcer and information specialist for the Black Vein Syndicate. Age discrepancy suspected but unconfirmed until biometric scans post-capture. Incident report summary: trolley terminal robbery, setup, location, Central Tokyo Underground Line, Sector 11. Terminal date, redacted. Target, alleged clandestine hero support transport fund. Summary: the Midoriya siblings were tipped off to a supposed off-book hero commission fund transfer at the trolley terminal. In reality, the information was falsified by a rogue informant working in tandem with HPSC's undercover division. The siblings arrived with surgical precision, disabling surveillance and executing crowd control tactics consistent with high-level paramilitary training. Upon breaching the ticket vault, they encountered an ambush of pro-heroes led by Redacted. Despite overwhelming odds, Izumi and her siblings resisted capture for nearly 45 minutes, during which Izumi neutralized 3 heroes non-lethally and created a defensive kill zone. The operation ended only after Shinso was critically injured and Izumi surrendered to protect him. Himiko was apprehended moments later. HPSC Psychological and Threat Assessment Notes, redacted for internal use. Subject, Izumi Midoriya. Age at time of capture, 15. Estimated Yakuza entry, age 6, confirmed by syndicate defectors. Quirk status, confirmed quirkless adoptive mother. Himiko Midoriya, civilian, no criminal record, unaware of children's affiliations. Keynotes, intelligence, exceptionally high. Subject is capable of real-time strategic planning with military precision. She studies enemy behavior obsessively and adapts mid-combat. Combat style, gunslinger-based, favors mobility, misdirection, and lethal precision. Her use of old-world firearms, Remington New Model Army revolvers, indicates a psychological attachment to classic dueling and street justice ideology. Moral code, subject refuses to harm children or bystanders. Several robbery victims were treated for shock but otherwise unharmed. She exhibits loyalty and protectiveness toward her siblings, even surrendering herself to ensure their safety. Threat level, previously designated Alpha, reclassified to controlled high risk under UA's supervision. Recommendation, closely monitored reintegration into society through the UA Hero course. Subject possesses potential for legitimate hero work if properly reformed, though likelihood of recidivism remains high without psychological counseling and supervision. Special advisory, the siblings were legally adopted by Himiko Midoriya through legitimate channels. Their double lives were hidden through forged school records, manipulated social media, and advanced ID scrambling software likely provided by the Black Vein Syndicate. The public still does not know they are minors, and the HPSC has placed a GG order to protect the family identity pending integration. Izumi Midoriya's signature outfit, the Crimson Desperado, Izumi's hybrid, hero, Yakuza outfit is a deadly fusion of old Western outlaw flair and brutal urban functionality. It's intimidating, stylish, and built for war, designed to turn every alley into a dusty duel ground and every rooftop into a last stand. Outfit description, hat, a weathered black gambler hat with a wide brim, custom stitched with red thread along the edges. A silver Midoriya family crest is pinned above the left temple, its true meaning known only to her and her siblings. The hat casts a deep shadow over her eyes, enhancing her outlaw mystique. Coat, a long, double-slit duster coat made of reinforced, bullet-resistant Kevlar leather hybrid. Matte black in color with subtle red embroidery shaped like thorny vines running down the back and sleeves. When she moves, the coat fans out like wings, making her appear larger, more theatrical, especially during showdowns. Shirt and vest, underneath the coat, she wears a high-collared BLD red blouse, tucked beneath a black, steel-threaded corset vest. The vest has hidden plating around the ribs and spine to protect vital organs. The crimson shirt bears faint floral patterns, a subtle homage to her Yakuza roots. Bandoliers, 3 black leather bandoliers crisscross her chest and waist in an X and belt formation. Each holds 12 speedloader clips, 6 rounds each, for her dual revolvers meticulously arranged for balance and fast reloading. The bandoliers are burnished with hand-etched dragons and silver studs. Pants, black gunfighter pants with red side stripes and inner holster mounts for hidden blades and extra ammo. Reinforced knee pads are stitched beneath the fabric. A silver buckle bearing a cracked star motif sits at her belt center. Boots, knee-high, steel-toed leather boots with hollow heels for extra storage smoke bombs, microblades, or lockpicks. They click sharply when she walks, each step heavy with purpose. Gloves, fingerless gloves made of grip-enhanced leather with Kevlar stitching across the knuckles. A pressure sensor in the palms ensures zero slip during rapid reloads or high-speed draws. Revolvers, resting in quick-draw thigh holsters, her custom Remington New Model Army revolvers are black-chromed, engraved with wind and flame motifs. The grips are bone-white with red etchings in the shape of roses. Each weapon hums faintly when drawn, almost like they're alive in her hands. Mystery element, every time Izumi dons the full outfit and enters the battlefield, the song, Bambaleo, by the Gypsy Kings inexplicably begins to play in the distance. It doesn't come from any source, no speaker, no device, no discernible origin. It's just there echoing faintly through the air like a ghostly soundtrack to her legend. Attempts to record or trace it have failed, only adding to the rumors. When you hear Bambaleo you're already in her sights. Urban Requiem. The thrum of the underground train station felt like the heartbeat of a city that never slept. Central Tokyo's Sector 11 terminal, a busy hub, a bustling nexus of commuters, tourists, and the occasional transient, was quiet for now. The late hour ensured the crowds had thinned, leaving behind just a handful of late-night workers and drifters, unaware of the storm coming their way. Izumi Midoriya stood in the shadows of a steel pillar, her crimson desperado outfit blending with the darkness. The faint flicker of neon lights above cast an eerie glow across her boots. The swirling air in the terminal carried the scent of stale popcorn and faint whiffs of metallic dust. But none of it bothered her. She was focused, always. Her bandana was wrapped tightly around her nose and mouth, leaving only her strikingly cold eyes visible beneath the brim of her worn gambler's hat. It wasn't the first time she'd walked into this kind of place, but tonight was different. Beside her, Hitoshi Midoriya, her adopted brother, shifted impatiently, his hands running over the smooth surface of the black leather gloves he always wore. His eyes flickered toward the clock on the wall above the escalator, a timer ticking away. He didn't have the same cold confidence as Izumi, but he was just as sharp, and just as dangerous when the moment called for it. Himiko Midoriya, the adopted sister, stood by the wall near the station's vault entrance. Her eyes danced with mischief, as always, but there was a note of unease that could only be detected by someone who knew her well. She wasn't the type to hesitate. But then again, they weren't supposed to be here. The information they had received about the clandestine transport of Hero Commission funds was faulty. A setup. They'd been lied to. And Izumi would make sure they didn't walk out empty-handed. Izumi's revolvers clicked in her holsters as she shifted her stance, her eyes narrowing toward the vault door. It was old, rusting at the edges, with a big red, "Authorized Personnel Only" sign hanging loosely from the doorframe. It was almost laughable. The Yakuza had sent them in with promises of fortune, of easy riches, but now, they had to make do with whatever they could take. "You two ready?" Her voice was low, steady, a perfect reflection of the calm before the storm. Himiko grinned widely, showing her teeth as she held up a black bag. "Always ready." Hitoshi cracked his neck, trying to ease the tension that had been building in his shoulders. "Let's get this over with." Izumi nodded, reaching up and adjusting the bandana across her face, covering the lower half of her features. She pulled the brim of her hat lower, just above her eyes. The music was playing in her head, always. The rhythm of her life. Her fingers brushed against the bandoliers crossing her chest, ensuring each clip of her revolvers was secure. The same steady hum, the same rhythmic beat, played on repeat, Bambaleo, a song she couldn't quite explain. It followed her, no matter where she went. She could hear it now. "Let's move," she commanded. With the precision of a well-oiled machine, they moved as one. Himiko darted toward the station's security panel, her nimble fingers working swiftly to disable the alarm. Hitoshi was already at the main terminal, readying his skills in mind control, prepared to deal with any witnesses. Izumi approached the vault. It was locked, but it wasn't an issue. She took a moment to examine the door, tracing the edges with her fingers as her mind worked. She wasn't just a gunfighter, she had learned to read situations, to make the perfect strike at the perfect moment. It was all part of the deadly dance she'd been trained in since she could walk. "It's just like the old days," she muttered under her breath, the faintest trace of a smile crossing her lips. One shot. One kill. Her revolvers were already in her hands. Her fingers adjusted the weight, the cold steel reassuring against her skin. She took a breath, and then the sound of a hammer being pulled back echoed through the empty terminal. The heist had begun. Himiko's laughter echoed through the terminal, a little too loud for comfort. But it didn't matter. She could get away with it. They all could. The lights flickered momentarily, and the sound of a soft click filled the space between them. The vault door was open. But instead of a rush of riches, stacks of yen or bags of stolen goods, there was only an empty metal space, coated in the smell of dust and rust. Izumi froze. Hitoshi's eyes widened from his post by the terminal. It's empty. Himiko walked to the vault, peering inside. This can't be right. Izumi's heart raced, though her expression didn't change. Her instincts screamed that something was wrong. It wasn't supposed to go down like this. She should have expected it. The Yakuza, the false tip-off. She should have been more suspicious. Set up. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried across the silent terminal like a shot fired from the barrel of her revolvers. She felt the weight of the words land. Her mind began to race, quickly calculating the next steps. She stepped away from the vault, her eyes scanning the terminal. The walls, the pillars, the exits. It was too quiet, almost too perfect. The air felt charged, like before a lightning strike. She didn't trust it. We need to leave. Now. The tension was palpable. Himiko immediately began backing away from the vault, her eyes flickering nervously, while Hitoshi started to move toward the exit, his mind processing the situation with unnerving calm. Izumi scanned the area again, feeling the shift in the air. The song of the Gypsy Kings that no one else could hear seemed louder, its notes hanging heavier in the space between the trio. Bamboleo, always haunting her movements. As if on cue, the sound of footsteps echoed from one of the distant platforms, followed by a voice, a harsh, mechanical voice that sounded distorted, almost otherworldly in the silence. Freeze. Hero Commission. Hands in the air. A chill ran down Izumi's spine. She glanced at Hitoshi, then Himiko. Their faces mirrored hers, eyes wide, but hardened by years of living on the edge. Ambush, she muttered, then quickly flicked a glance at the exit. They could still make it. But not without a fight. With a fluid motion, Izumi drew both revolvers and ped them. A breath. Her body moved in sync with the rhythm of the world around her. Get ready, she whispered to her siblings. They were about to face an enemy that had set them up from the beginning. But Izumi was no stranger to betrayal. She had been built for moments like this. The clock was ticking. And it was about time for the real game to begin. Freeze. Hero Commission. Hands in the air. The echo of the command had barely finished reverberating through the station when Izumi's revolvers were already up, both barrels pointed toward the source of the voice. The red glow of the emergency lights painted streaks across her crimson desperado coat, outlining the silhouette of a legend in the making or a ghost about to vanish. She didn't wait. Boom. Boom. Twin cracks echoed like thunder across the concrete. The first two agents went down in the blink of an eye, one shot hitting center mass, the other just under the chin. Screams erupted, and the sound of boots pounding the terminal escalated. Sirens began to wail overhead, an alarm Himiko hadn't caught. They were already boxed in. Cover left. Izumi shouted, sliding behind a luggage kiosk as a barrage of gunfire pinged off the steel walls behind her. The concussive thunder of semi-auto weapons echoed across the underground station. Hitoshi was already behind a row of benches, picking off advancing agents with mechanical precision, eyes narrowed in grim focus. Every shot he took was deliberate, and every bullet he fired was to disable, not kill. He still had a line he wouldn't cross, not like her. Himiko, wild-eyed and smiling like she was dancing in the rain, darted between columns with a pair of serrated butterfly knives in her hands. She slipped behind one agent and dug her blade into his thigh, twisting it before stealing his firearm. "Thanks, love," she sang. But for every agent they dropped, two more took their place. The HPSC had come in hard and prepared. "We need a way out," Hitoshi yelled, reloading behind the bench. His clip clattered to the ground, spent. "We're boxed in. Izumi's eye scanned the space. A trolley platform, unused and dimly lit, lay just beyond the far terminal gates still connected to the old rail line. Her mind raced. They could take it. South line, she called, pointing toward the abandoned trolley. Move. I'll cover. She leapt from behind the kiosk, both revolvers blazing, cutting a path forward. Her boots hit the tiled floor hard, her coat flaring behind her like a burning flag. Bullets flew past her, tearing through the air and nicking the edge of her hat. One grazed her right shoulder but she didn't slow down. Hitoshi grabbed Himiko by the wrist, and they dashed toward the trolley platform. Izumi followed, moving in reverse, squeezing off 2 more shots before ducking behind a marble pillar. Her breathing was fast but even. Her eyes sharp. They made it to the trolley. Go. Drive, she barked. Hitoshi jumped into the pilot's seat and slammed his fist onto the manual override lever. Sparks flew from the console. The ancient engine coughed to life, the wheels grinding as it lurched forward with a metallic groan. Izumi jumped aboard last, flipping one revolver backward and firing off the last of her clip at a squad of agents bursting onto the platform. One went down screaming, the others diving for cover. The trolley began to pick up speed, screeching along the narrow tracks of the long-abandoned maintenance route. The wind tore through the open trolley as it sped through the subterranean passage. Sparks danced along the rails as it swerved past tight corners, decades of dust blowing into the air like ash from a firestorm. Izumi sat on the edge of the trolley bed, replacing her revolver clips with practiced ease. One bandolier was nearly empty. She had only 6 full clips left. You okay? Hitoshi asked, eyes never leaving the track ahead. Fine, she said through gritted teeth, rolling her injured shoulder. The pain was sharp, but manageable. Himiko giggled as she wiped blood off her cheek, not hers. Her blonde hair blew wildly in the tunnel wind. That was fun. We should do this more often. Izumi didn't smile. It's not over. And she was right. Up. Ahead, the track forked, one path collapsed, the other barely lit. Hitoshi veered the trolley toward the open line, but the speed was too much. The brakes squealed. Metal screeched against metal. The trolley bucked like a wild animal and crashed. The world twisted. Izumi flew forward as the trolley slammed sideways into the tunnel wall. Her back hit cold concrete, and the air rushed from her lungs. The revolvers were knocked from her hands. She rolled twice, her coat tearing, one boot catching on the bent metal rail. Silence. Then mess. Groans. Izumi. Hitoshi's voice, pained but close. You okay? She coughed hard, blood trickling from her mouth. Her vision doubled for a second before she shook it clear. Still breathing, Himiko laughed, even as she limped toward a wall, clutching her side. Dibs on the next trolley. But the sound that followed silenced them all, boots. Dozens of them. Closing in fast. They were surrounded. Flashlights shone down from both ends of the tunnel. Tactical visors glinted. Agents called out over radios. Targets in sight. All 3 alive. Move in. Don't let them rearm. Izumi's hand reached out toward one of her revolvers, lying just feet away, its cylinder empty. She paused. Her eye caught Hitoshi's, then Himiko's. Their bags were gone. Ammo spent. Bodies battered. Surrounded. Izumi exhaled slowly, letting the adrenaline leave her limbs. She sat up fully, ignoring the ache in her side. Her bandana had fallen, her mouth was set in a grim, cold line. Her hands lifted in surrender, fingers spread. We're done. It didn't take long. The agents swarmed in. Weapons raised. Orders barked. Izumi, Hitoshi, and Himiko knelt against the wall, hands on their heads. Zip ties bit into their wrists, cold steel pressing into their backs. One agent, a senior by the look of his armor, paused in front of Izumi and stared. "These are kids," he muttered in disbelief. Another replied, stunned, "No way. These are the Midoriyas. The Crimson Desperado, the Ghost Mind, and the Knife Witch. They're teenagers. 15, 16 at most," the first said, shaking his head. "We thought they were in their 20s. As the agents dragged them away, Izumi kept her head high. Even in defeat, even in chains, she held that same quiet defiance. Blood trailed down her temple. Her hat was gone. Her coat was scorched. And still that DMN song echoed somewhere in the depths of the tunnel. Bamboleo. Nobody knew where it came from. But it followed her. Sector 11 Detention Block, HPSC headquarters. 2 hours after capture, the room was sterile. Not just clean but clinical. Concrete walls washed in pale LED light, a table bolted to the floor, chairs that looked more like shackles than furniture. A single camera blinked red in the upper corner. The door was sealed tight. Triple locked. Electrified. And somehow, against every standard protocol in the Hero Public Safety Commission's interrogation doctrine, all 3 Midoriya siblings had been placed in the same room. Izumi sat slouched in the center chair, her crimson desperado coat hanging from her shoulders like a funeral shroud. It was ripped in half a dozen places, stained with blood and dust, and the faint smell of gunpowder still clung to it like memory. Her bandana had been confiscated. Her hat too. But her eyes, especially the one untouched by blindness, burned just as sharp. Calculating. Cold. Himiko had already curled up in the corner chair like it was her living room sofa, her legs crossed, hands cuffed in front of her. She hummed a soft, twisted tune, Bamboleo, in a broken whisper. No one taught her the lyrics. She just knew them now. Hitoshi sat opposite Izumi, eyes fixed on the surface of the steel table. His hair was damp with sweat, jaw set like stone. He hadn't spoken since they were dragged in. Not a word. But now, with the 3 of them finally alone, his lips parted. That was a setup. Voice flat. Sure. Quiet. Izumi didn't reply at first. Her eye twitched just once. Yeah. That was all she said. Himiko snorted. You think? Vault was dry. Guards moved too fast. Whole station was practically waiting for us with coffee and biscuits. She drew her knees up, resting her chin against them. Her smile faded for once. Someone fed us lies. Clean lies. And we bought every word. Not just lies, Hitoshi added, leaning forward slightly. They wanted us there. Not any crew. Not any gang. Us. The Midoriyas. Izumi's fingers clenched into fists. Her voice was low, a quiet growl rumbling behind every syllable. We were sold out. But by who? Himiko asked, rolling her wrists in the cuffs. The contact. The runner. Someone else. Izumi's mind retraced every step. Every name. Every whisper on the underworld circuit. She had vetted the intel herself. It came from a broker they'd used before. Reliable. Discreet. Too small time to attract HPSC attention. Unless someone was watching him. Unless someone got to him after he passed the job on. Doesn't matter, Izumi muttered. They'll find out soon enough. Whoever gave that lead, he's already in a morgue or under a different name. You think it was personal? Hitoshi asked. Izumi hesitated. No. Just efficient. We're messy. High profile. They've been trying to catch us for years. A cornered system plays dirty. And they used us to set an example. She looked around at the steel walls. Message received. Silence fell. Not heavy but sharp. Uncomfortable. Himiko broke it. So what now? Trial. Solitary. Execution. Izumi scoffed. We're minors. Barely. They'll throw us in some deep black site. Claim we're older. Fake IDs. Do whatever it takes to make us disappear. Not for justice, for optics. Hitoshi's jaw tightened. We didn't kill anyone on this one. We disabled. We neutralized. You only shot agents who fired first. Izumi looked up at him. Her blind eye stared past him. Her good eye didn't blink. You think that matters? It should. Himiko giggled dryly. Oh, you sweet summer child, they all knew better. Minutes passed. No interrogator came. No file dropped on the table. Just silence and the slow hum of the overhead lights. Hitoshi spoke again, softly. Do you regret it? Izumi looked up. What? Any of it. The Yakuza. The heists. The lies. All of it. Izumi's expression didn't change. No. She meant it. She leaned back in her chair, eyes half-lidded. We were born into a world that never asked if we wanted to play by its rules. They buried us the moment we were named Midoriya. You think the commission didn't know who Mom was before she adopted us? They knew. They let it happen. Then waited for a chance to use it. Himiko sighed. Maybe they hoped we'd turn out better. Izumi bared her teeth. Then they should have given us a reason to. Footsteps echoed in the hall outside. All three of them went quiet. Like flipping a SWCH. Professionals again. Ready for the next play. But for a moment, just a moment, the trio of infamous criminals looked like what they truly were, kids in adult chains. And for the first time since the robbery, Izumi's voice dropped to something near human. Stick to the story, she whispered. Don't break. Don't cry. Don't give them anything. Ride or die, Himiko whispered back with a smile. Hitoshi nodded once. Together. The door began to unlock. 3 clinks. A hiss. Then silence. Cages and questions. HPSC interrogation room, sublevel B, 7, Tokyo Quirk Regulation Center time, 10:37 a.m. The room was colder than Sector 11's holding cell. The difference wasn't temperature, it was intent. This wasn't a room meant to house people. It was meant to strp them down, mentally and emotionally. The kind of place where reputations unraveled and truths were torn out like rotten teeth. One long, stainless steel table. 3 chairs on one side. 1 chair on the other. The Midoriya siblings had been separated on the way down, then ushered in one after the other. Izumi was the last to enter, her hands still cuffed in front of her, coat draped over her shoulders like a cape. She walked with the same calmness she always did, even barefoot, even bruised. Her green eyes scanned the room. Nizu sat perched on the table's edge, legs swinging slightly, his dark beady eyes too sharp for a face that's small and fuzzy. He had a clipboard in one paw. Beside him stood Aizawa, arms crossed, hair tied back. His gaze was unreadable but never left Izumi's. The third figure was a woman in a sharply pressed white suit, black gloves, and thick square glasses. Her hair was silver. Not gray. Artificially silver. Every strand perfect. Representative Kid Nishiro, Hero Public Safety Commission, she introduced herself coldly. Izumi didn't sit down immediately. She tilted her head toward the overhead light, stared directly into it with her half-blind eye, then let out a sharp breath. Before we start, can I get my eye patch back? Or my hat, she said, tone neutral but firm. That DMN light's killing my eye. Aizawa gave a subtle look toward Nizu. Nizu nodded once. Granted. Just the eye patch. A guard outside the door slipped in and passed the item to her, a weathered black leather eye patch, clearly custom fit. The fabric smelled faintly of gun oil and tobacco smoke. Izumi put it on slowly, like donning armor. The moment the strap tightened across her head, bamboleo. Bambolia, the room froze. The faint, unmistakable sound of the Gypsy Kings wafted through the concrete walls as if conjured from thin air. There were no visible speakers. No media devices in the room. Nothing electronic out of place. Yet the music played. Aizawa blinked. Where is that coming from? Kid Nishiro's eyes narrowed. Security, mute the room audio feed. She tapped her comms. Control, what's going on with, it happens when she wears that, Hitoshi muttered, seated with his arms chained to the chair beside Himiko. The hat, too, Himiko added brightly, her voice sing-song. Doesn't matter where. Outside. Inside. Underground. No speakers. No power. It just plays. Only when she wears it. No known source, Hitoshi continued, more deadpan. And no, we've never figured out why. Kid stared at them like they were speaking another language. It's a thing, Izumi said simply. She adjusted her eye patch and finally sat down. The song faded into the background, not off, but dulled, like it respected the moment. Nizu cleared his throat, recovering first. Well, now that we've addressed the, musical anomaly, let's begin. He flipped his clipboard over. Nizu, you're all underage. Yet your operational record spans nearly a decade. Contract hits. High-profile robberies. Arms trafficking. Yakuza affiliation since at least age 6. Confirmed body count is, well, alarming. Would you like to explain any of that? Izumi, calmly, no. Kid's lips thinned. Kid, this isn't a confession, Midoriya. It's an evaluation. You're in deep violation of multiple international Quirk ordinances even as a Quirkless citizen. Izumi, that's ironic coming from a commission that let me go feral for 9 years. Kid, we had no knowledge of your activities. Izumi smirked. Then maybe the commission should stop hiring third-rate informants. Nizu leaned forward. We're not here to threaten you. We want to understand you. All of you. Hitoshi spoke next, voice quiet but firm. You want to dissect us. Classify us. See if you can use us. Aizawa finally spoke. You're not entirely wrong. They all turned toward him. Aizawa, but not for what you think. You're dangerous. That's a fact. But you're also efficient. Ruthless. Tactical. The system failed you, and yet you've managed to survive it and improve in ways most adults can't. Himiko grinned. Ah, you're flirting. Aizawa ignored her. Aizawa, you're here now because someone set you up. We agree. Kid glared at him, but didn't interrupt. Nizu chimed in again. And if someone did set you up, that means someone inside the underworld wants you out of the game. Or worse, someone inside our world wants to discredit your lineage. Izumi's fingers tapped the table. So what's the play? You kill us. Or recruit us. Kid interjected. Neither. Yet. You're a PR disaster. The public thinks you're adults. Hardened criminals. If word gets out that Himiko Midoriya's children were the Crimson Desperado and her crew, well, there would be questions. Hitoshi raised an eyebrow. So what? You want us to lie low? Nizu gave a small smile. We want you to enroll. Dead silence. Izumi blinked. Come again. Aizawa clarified. You, a high hero course. We've placed difficult students before. We've reformed them. If you want to keep your freedom and your mother's name off every new CYCL in Japan, you'll cooperate. Himiko cackled. You're kidding. Ki didn't blink. Not even a little. Izumi leaned back in her chair, the edges of her coat draping down like BLD-stained curtains. The music in the background picked up just a touch louder. So, we go from outlaws to students. Nizu, you already are students. Of violence. Of strategy. We simply want to give you a new curriculum. Izumi was quiet for a long time. Then, give me my hat, and maybe I'll consider it. Ki bristled. Nizu just chuckled and waved a paw. The guard returned. A worn black desperado hat was placed gently on the table. Izumi picked it up, dusted it off and placed it atop her wild green curls. The guitar picked up again clear as church bells. Bamboleo, unapologetic. Echoing from nowhere. Aizawa sighed. We're going to have to run a whole separate investigation just for that song. HPSC Interrogation Room, Sublevel B, 7, Tokyo Quirk Regulation Center Time, 11:42 a.m. The music had died down again. Like a ghostly companion sensing its presence was no longer needed, Bamboleo faded into silence. The overhead lights still hummed faintly, but Izumi's eye patch dulled their sting enough to think clearly. She sat cross-legged now, her hat tilted forward slightly, casting a soft shadow across her remaining green eye. Hitoshi leaned forward, elbows on the table. Himiko sat in her chair like a child bored in church, slumped sideways, tongue poking her cheek. Across from them, Nizu, Aizawa, and Kid Nishiro conferred quietly for a few moments. Whispers and nods. Sharp glances. A few files were exchanged from a sealed folder. Finally, Nizu turned back to face them. Let's get down to specifics. Izumi raised an eyebrow, arms still crossed. Nizu continued, tail flicking slowly. We'll need to iron out the terms of your enrollment. UA is not a halfway house. But it is flexible when necessity demands it. Kid Nishiro cut in, adjusting her glasses. You will attend under your legal names, Izumi Midoriya, Hitoshi Midoriya, and Himiko Midoriya. However, your aliases will be redacted from all public-facing documents, enrollment records, and class rosters. Izumi narrowed her eye. So no one at you will know who we were. Aizawa replied, voice dry. Correct. Not unless you tell them yourselves. Which I advise against. Hitoshi nodded. Fine. But what about the press? Our faces are on more wanted posters than half the Tokyo underworld. Ki didn't blink. They know the aliases. Not the names. Not the faces. You've never been arrested. Every image of you on the street is grainy, blurry, or digitally altered by your own countermeasures. That makes this easier. Nizu added, we've already planted the narrative. A trio of promising, if eccentric, quirked teens with unorthodox home lives receiving special recommendations to you. Hi. As far as the world's concerned, that's all anyone needs to know. Himiko grinned, resting her chin on her hands. So we're the mystery transfer students. Izumi's voice came quiet but serious. And our mom. A pause. Aizawa finally answered. We tell her the truth minus everything else. She'll be informed that you've been scouted for you, via a special underground recommendation system, due to outstanding field aptitude and unique training backgrounds. Izumi leaned forward, staring at him. You really think she'll buy that? Nizu gave a small, sad smile. Inko Midoriya has spent the better part of the last 10 years wondering if her children were alive. She'll believe what she needs to. A silence passed through them, heavier than before. Kid closed her folder. Once enrolled, you'll be monitored. Heavily. Dorm residence is non-negotiable. Training oversight will be under Aizawa's direct supervision. Himiko blinked. Dorms. You're making us live there. Nizu nodded. Temporarily. Until we determine you're not going to burn the place down or resurrect your old contact network. Izumi's gaze flicked toward Hitoshi, then Himiko. She gave a short nod. Fine. We'll behave. Keed smiled faintly. You'll pretend to, at least. That's close enough. 12:26 p.m. outside the Quirk Regulation Center, East Lot. The car was an unassuming black SUV with reinforced side panels and tinted windows. Civilian grade, but barely. The sort of vehicle Aizawa probably used for multiple jobs: quiet transport, retrieval missions, or anything involving the weirder students you, sometimes picked up. Aizawa stood beside the open driver's side door, a pair of sunglasses over his eyes despite the cloudy sky. His scarf was wound tightly around his neck. He said nothing as the trio stepped out of the building in fresh clothes: civilian, modern, slightly baggy. Izumi had her coat back, hat firmly in place. Her eye patch sat comfortably behind the brim. Hitoshi slid into the back seat first. Middle seat, as always. Himiko followed, claiming the window seat like a child claiming treasure. If you sleep on me again, I'm stabbing you in your sleep. Izumi climbed in last, carefully folding into the passenger seat. Her hands rubbed slowly against her thighs, subconsciously. Aizawa started the engine. The radio clicked on. And in other news, still no confirmation on the identities of the Crimson Desperado and her two accomplices after their high-profile arrest last week in Yokohama. Click. Aizawa turned the dial off. The silence afterward was almost respectful. They drove in quiet for a long time. Cityscape turned to suburbia. Buildings shrank. Sidewalks grew cracks. Neighborhoods grew older. Izumi's shoulders tensed more and more the closer they got. She hadn't seen the house in nearly a decade. She recognized the tree before the street sign. The gnarled thing near the sidewalk that she used to climb when she was small. Hitoshi used to hang her dolls from the lower branch like a serial killer. Himiko had once painted her name on the trunk with mud. The house came into view. Beige. 2 stories. Clean but lived in. Curtains drawn. The mailbox still crooked. Aizawa pulled into the driveway and parked. He didn't turn the engine off. You've got 10 minutes. I'll wait. Izumi stared at the front door. Does she know we're coming? Aizawa nodded. We called ahead. She thinks you're being dropped off for orientation prep. Himiko snorted. That's kinda true. Hitoshi elbowed her. Don't ruin this. They stepped out slowly, like soldiers disembarking onto unfamiliar land. The door opened before they could reach the steps. Himiko Midoriya stood there. She looked older. Smaller. Paler. But her eyes were the same. She covered her mouth, tears already brimming, and whispered, Izumi. Hitoshi. Himiko, she stepped forward, arms trembling. Izumi, for once, didn't flinch when she was hugged. None of them did. Ashes and Echoes time, 12:48 p.m. Location, Midoriya household, Northern Tokyo District. For a moment, time stood still in the doorway. Himiko Midoriya stood between the frame and the past, her arms wrapped around all three of her children as if willing them not to vanish again. Her breath hitched softly, not in sobs but in stutters, as though the act of embracing them made her lungs forget how to function. 10 years of grief had thinned her cheeks, carved soft lines beneath her eyes, and settled a permanent quiver in her fingers. But now, in this moment, she held them like a prayer answered too late. I don't know what to say. Izumi didn't speak. Her gloved hand merely rose, pressing gently against her mother's back. Hitoshi gave a small smile. You don't have to, Mom. Himiko looked up. You're smaller than I remember. Himiko let out a soft, incredulous laugh through her tears and held them tighter. 1:03 p.m. Living room, Midoriya residence. The house hadn't changed much. A new coat of paint, a few updated fixtures, but the bones were the same. The couch they used to jump on was still there, reupholstered in sunflower gold. A few new family photos were on the wall, blurry shots of Inko with distant relatives, but no new children. No surrogate family. No foster symbols. Just her, alone. I kept the rooms as they were, Inko said, fingers nervously curling around the hem of her cardigan. I always hoped. Izumi walked ahead, trailing her fingers against the banister. We noticed. Thanks. Aizawa waited outside in the car, as promised. No pressure. No ticking clock. Just time. They decided to rotate. Himiko went first. Alone time with Inko. Hitoshi and Izumi headed upstairs to collect a few of their things. 1:17 p.m., kitchen. Inko poured tea with shaking hands. Himiko sat at the counter with her boots kicked up, nose scrunched as she took in the scent of chamomile and the gentle hum of the old ceiling fan. You've got too many plants. She pointed at the windowsill. It looks like a greenhouse exploded. Inko smiled nervously. They help with the silence. Himiko studied her for a moment, then sipped. I used to think you hated me. Inko's hand froze mid-stir. Why would you think that? Because I wasn't yours. Himiko swirled her cup absently. Because I was messy. Different. Loud. Inko stepped around the counter. Sat across from her. You were my daughter the moment I held you. You always will be. Himiko didn't respond. But her hands stopped fidgeting. 1:34 p.m., Izumi's room. The door creaked open with ghostly familiarity. The room was a tomb preserved in time. Dusty posters, a cracked lamp, a bookshelf of faded fairy tale novels. But at the center, like an altar, stood her gramophone. Old. Brass horn curled like a serpent. Cherrywood base polished to a faded gleam. The tone arm etched with initials worn away by generations of use. A relic from the early 1800s, one of the last 100 in existence, and certainly the only one nestled in a Tokyo suburb. Izumi stood before it like a pilgrim before a shrine. She knelt down, pulled back the velvet cloth that protected the records. A breath. A soft whisper, still waiting, huh? She ran her gloved fingers across the needle, carefully winding the crank. The gears inside made a familiar grinding sound, almost like an exhale. She didn't play it. Not yet. Just the touch was enough. She took it apart with reverence, horn, arm, base, carefully wrapping each piece in cloth. One more thing to carry with her into the future. 1:46 p.m., backyard garden. Hitoshi stood beside Inko on the wooden deck. A few vegetables sprouted in tidy rows, but the soil was wild with flowers. Dandelions, foxglove, lavender. He squatted down, plucking a weed. I remember when we planted that patch. Inko chuckled. You threw dirt in your sister's face, and she tried to bury you alive. We were 6. It was a rough day. They fell into silence again, but this time it wasn't heavy. Just quiet. You know, Hitoshi said softly, I don't remember my BRTH mother's face anymore. Inko turned to him, the wind teasing her sleeves. You don't need to, she replied. Because you're mine. He smiled. Soft. Real. DMN right. 2:04 p.m. entryway. The 3 siblings reassembled in the living room, small bags slung over their shoulders. Izumi carried the cloth-covered gramophone under one arm like a sacred object. Hitoshi had slung his old guitar case over his back, its neck still wrapped in duct tape. Himiko had a satchel full of mismatched notebooks and an old butterfly knife she insisted was purely nostalgic. Inko held out a small slip of paper with 3 phone numbers scribbled on it in neat handwriting. I don't care what the news says, she whispered, hands trembling again. You're my children. You always will be. And I want to hear from you. Often. Izumi gently took the slip, folded it, and tucked it into Inko's cardigan pocket. We'll call. No matter what. Hitoshi pulled out his phone. We've got your number saved. You'll probably get sick of us. Himiko leaned in, kissing her mother's cheek. Speak for yourself, I plan on haunting the dorms. They all laughed. And then it was time. 2:21 p.m., outside the Midoriya residence. Aizawa waited by the open SUV, scarf fluttering slightly in the breeze. The siblings climbed in, Izumi in the front, the other two in the back. Inko stood on the porch, watching them go, a tissue in one hand. As the car pulled away, she didn't wave. She just stood there. Watching. Izumi glanced in the side mirror. The figure of a woman smaller than memory, standing tall against the past. For the first time in a decade, all three of them were going home. Not to the house. To U.A. Time, 3:16 p.m. Location, U.A. High School Dormitories, South Sector, Building C, Unit 5. The sleek black SUV came to a slow stop outside the newer wing of U.A.'s sprawling campus, far removed from the main dormitory towers housing the rest of the first-year students. Building C stood modest in height but firm in stature, a two-story construct reinforced with concrete and aura-sensitive shielding, equipped with private access, reinforced walls, and surveillance tech discreet enough to go unnoticed. It looked more like a government safe house than student housing. Here we are, Aizawa muttered as he killed the engine. Unit 5. Your own space, outfitted for 3. Izumi, Himiko, and Hitoshi stepped out silently. The air was crisp, the scent of fresh turf and concrete mixing with the subtle undertone of industrial cleaning supplies. Sunlight hit the building's darkened windows at just the right angle, casting fractured glints against the metal siding. Aizawa led them to the entryway. A fingerprint scanner hummed beside a dark steel door. He stepped aside. And motioned toward it. You're all registered. This is your space. Keypads in each bedroom. Cameras in the hall and front door only. No eyes inside the unit. And the neighbors? Hitoshi asked. None. Aizawa deadpanned. This wing was empty before you. The faculty agreed privacy was necessary for now. Izumi stepped forward and pressed her thumb to the reader. A quiet chime sounded. The door clicked open. 3:21 p.m., inside Unit 5. The apartment's interior was surprisingly warm neutral beiges and soft wood paneling lit by gentle, energy-efficient lights. The entryway gave way to a modest living space, a sunken couch wrapped around a low table, with a kitchenette tucked in the corner. A hallway branched off to the left, leading to 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. The walls were bare. The windows sealed with sliding reinforced shutters. It wasn't glamorous. But it was theirs. It smells like new paint and institutional loneliness. Himiko flopped onto the couch with a dramatic groan. I'm gonna make this place look like a bloodstained temple. No you're not, Izumi muttered, already heading for the far bedroom. I call the one with 2 windows. Hitoshi shouted behind her. You get what you get, telepath. I'm not a telepath. The door to Izumi's room shut with finality. 3:34 p.m., Izumi's room. The room was Spartan. 1 twin bed, a desk, a narrow closet, and a single high window overlooking the artificial training fields beyond the campus wall. Izumi placed the box she'd carried with both hands on the desk. She unwrapped each piece of the gramophone slowly, the curved horn, the bass, the needle arm. Each cloth peel felt like a memory returned to light. With a practiced hand, she reassembled it in silence. The moment it was whole, she placed a record on the turntable and gave the crank a slow wind. It did not play. Not yet. She let it rest. Like her. She moved to unpack her clothes. Next, monochrome, precise. Pants folded with military exactness, shirts rolled and arranged in a dresser. A small, tattered photo of her mother and her as a toddler, one of the few not left behind, was slipped into the corner of the mirror. Then she stepped back. Breathed. One room done. 4:01 p.m., Himiko's room. Her space was already chaos. Clothes flung onto the bed in color-coded piles. Photos of weird clown memes pinned into the wall with red pushpins. A dreamcatcher made of zip ties and bones hung over the headboard. Somehow, she'd brought 3 lava lamps. "I'm making this place mine, baby," she whispered to herself. From one duffel she pulled out a collection of mismatched notebooks, journal entries, ramblings, poetry, crime reports. She stacked them in a neat tower by the bed. Then, finally, with a low, reverent hum, she hung a black curtain rod and draped crimson fabric around her bed, like a vampire canopy. Perfect. 4:17 p.m., Hitoshi's room. His setup was utilitarian. 2 guitars, 1 electric, 1 acoustic, hung on foam mounts above the bed. A small synth keyboard rested on the desk. A neat stack of books ranging from Modern Ethics and Quirk Law to Neuroscience for Dummies sat beside a deck of tarot cards. He plugged in a set of black string lights along the upper trim of the walls and flipped them on. The soft orange glow was just enough to feel like his. He took out a frame, a photo from years ago, blurry and faded. The 3 of them, dressed like little monsters on Halloween, Izumi already in all black, Himiko with fake fangs, and him in a purple cape and goggles. He stared at it for a long while before placing it next to his pillow. 5:03 p.m., shared living room. The trio reconvened. Izumi sat cross-legged on the couch, cleaning her gloves with a cloth. Hitoshi lounged beside her with a can of carbonated coffee. Himiko was hanging upside down off the backrest, blood rushing to her face. "So," Hitoshi said, nudging Izumi, "what's the game plan?" "Blend in. Keep quiet." Izumi shook her head. "We don't blend. And we don't hide." Himiko snorted. "We're not using aliases either, right? We are the Midoriyas." Izumi nodded. "We keep our names. But, we keep Mom out of the press." "Agreed," Hitoshi said, lifting his can. "Hell yeah," Himiko chimed. "If anyone asks, the press only knows us as Ghost Spider, Red Fawn, and Null anyway. No paper trail." Izumi's voice was firm. "We give them nothing else. Not a whisper of Inko. Not a photo. Not a name." They all raised their drinks, Izumi with water, Hitoshi with coffee, and Himiko with blood orange soda, and tapped the cans together. "To new beginnings," Hitoshi said. "To controlled chaos," Himiko replied. Izumi smirked. "To staying dangerous." The room was quiet for a moment, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Then, from Izumi's room, a familiar crackle echoed. The gramophone. A soft static burst, followed by the slow, creeping rise of strings. Izumi stood slowly. Walked to her room. Let the door stay open. A moment later, the ancient voice of Django Reinhardt filtered through the air. Minor swing. It wasn't Bambaleo. But it was close enough. Something timeless. Something theirs. And the dorm. It didn't feel quite like a cage anymore. It felt like the start of something inevitable. Beneath the scars, time, 9:11 a.m. location, U.A., High School Medical Wing, Recovery Girls Office. The 3 Midoriya siblings sat in the waiting area, the sterile white walls of the medical wing feeling far too quiet for their liking. Izumi sat on the edge of the bench, her fingers drumming lightly on her knees. Himiko flipped through a magazine with little interest, the bright colors and glossy pages hardly registering. Hitoshi leaned against the wall with his arms crossed, his gaze focused on the floor. It had been a few days since their arrival, but today was the first time U.A. had taken them in for a proper medical checkup. Recovery Girls' office was clean and efficient. The scent of antiseptic mingled with a faint undertone of mint and vanilla, like it had been designed to be both clinical and calming. But for the trio, it felt far from soothing. It had been years since they'd been checked over by anyone with real medical expertise, and while they'd gotten by without issue, the reality of their situation was catching up with them. Izumi could feel the weight of their past pressing down on her. Her body, once a temple of precision and power, had been a canvas of scars long before she'd come to UA. She hadn't seen a doctor since she was 6, and the thought of someone else examining her, someone outside the circle of the Yakuza, left a bitter taste in her mouth. Still, she had to admit to herself that it was necessary. They couldn't carry the weight of their past forever. Eventually, it would catch up with them. Izumi Midoriya. The voice that broke the silence was gentle but firm, and Izumi looked up to see Recovery Girl standing in the doorway. Her presence was small, yet there was an undeniable authority in her demeanor. The woman was elderly, her white hair pulled back into a bun, with bright green eyes that seemed to see right through anyone who came into her office. She smiled warmly at them, though it didn't fully mask the concern in her gaze. "I suppose you're all here for a checkup," she asked, her tone laced with humor but carrying the weight of experience. "Come on in, let's get this over with." Izumi stood up, followed by Himiko and Hitoshi. They filed into the room, the door clicking shut behind them. 9:24 a.m., Recovery Girl's medical room. The exam room was well equipped but minimalistic, with the usual diagnostic tools scattered on countertops and shelves. A bed sat in the center, and a large screen mounted on the wall blinked with various readings. Recovery Girl gestured for them to sit, and they did so, but there was an undeniable discomfort in the air. Izumi had never liked people looking at her body for more than a few moments, especially not someone like Recovery Girl. She had spent years hiding the damage that had been done to her body, even from herself at times. She swallowed hard as she tugged at the collar of her crimson jacket, feeling a deep sense of unease settle in her stomach. "Let's get started with you, Izumi," Recovery Girl said, her voice gentle but insistent. "I'll need you to change into this gown so I can examine you properly." Izumi hesitated. She looked at Himiko and Hitoshi, both of whom were already taking seats. They wouldn't be in the room, and that's exactly what she wanted: privacy, if only for a moment. "Fine." Izumi walked over to the changing screen in the corner. As she pulled off her jacket, the sound of it scraping across her skin made her stomach turn. But she forced herself to steady her breath. A few minutes later, Izumi emerged from behind the screen, her hair still in a messy bun, her crimson jacket folded neatly on the chair. The gown felt far too thin, too vulnerable. She wanted to tear it off and return to the armor of her jacket, but she knew it was necessary. Recovery Girl didn't seem to notice Izumi's discomfort. She stepped closer, her eyes already scanning Izumi's posture, her gait, as she gently directed her to sit on the examination table. "Let's begin with the basics." Recovery Girl's hands were deft as she checked Izumi's pulse, her heart rate steady, though slightly elevated. "You're physically healthy, at least." She paused, running a hand through her silver hair, her sharp gaze never leaving Izumi. "But I can tell you've had your fair share of injuries." Izumi flinched, but Recovery Girl didn't seem to notice. "Do you mind if I take a look at your back?" she asked, her tone serious. "I need to check for any residual injuries or complications from past trauma." Izumi knew what was coming. She hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Go ahead." The gown was pulled down gently by Recovery Girl, exposing the full extent of Izumi's back, pale, scarred, and marred by a history she had long buried. The scars weren't just small wounds from scrapes and bruises. No. These were deep, jagged lines, some raised, others faded into her skin. WHP marks, claw marks, cuts made by sharp objects, some clearly inflicted by someone else. Izumi felt the heat of shame flood her cheeks. She wanted to shrink away, to hide the evidence of her past. But Recovery Girl was nothing if not professional. "I've seen worse," she murmured, her voice soft. "But the severity of this, it's clear you've been through hell, Izumi. Some of these marks, especially here, and here look like they came from a WHP. Izumi's breath hitched at the mention of the WHP. She didn't have to explain. She knew exactly which marks she was talking about. "You're right," Izumi said quietly, her voice laced with a mixture of bitterness and resignation. "Most of them were from the Yakuza. I took the punishment meant for Himiko and Hitoshi. I've got more scars than I can count. Some of them almost killed me." Himiko and Hitoshi both went quiet, their gazes softening, but they didn't speak. They knew. They had seen the aftermath of those beatings, Izumi's determination to protect them, no matter the cost. "The worst one," Izumi's voice faltered for a moment. "The worst one nearly killed me. It was meant for Himiko. She'd done something stupid, and they came for her. But I took the punishment instead. I didn't even fight back. I couldn't. I was too far gone." Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the table. "I don't even remember half of it. But the pain, it stays with me." Recovery Girl didn't say anything for a long moment. She simply took her time to inspect the scars, noting them on her tablet. Her expression softened as she began to carefully press around the marks, checking for any sign of internal damage. "You're lucky you healed as well as you did," Recovery Girl said after a few minutes. "Your regenerative ability must be stronger than I anticipated. There's no sign of long-term damage here. But you should take better care of yourself from now on." Izumi nodded, but she felt a pang of guilt in her chest. "I've been avoiding it for years." 9:46 a.m. After a few more tests, including a check of her pulse and stamina, Recovery Girl finally gave Izumi a nod of approval. "You're physically well, all things considered," she said, moving back to her tablet. "But your eye, your left one, the one that's been partially blind, is concerning. I think you'll need a more advanced treatment plan. If you have any old prescriptions for glasses, I can help with that, too. In the meantime, I suggest you get your reading glasses replaced." Izumi had completely forgotten about her glasses. They'd been destroyed years ago during a fight. "I need new ones," she said, the words almost foreign on her tongue. "I can't read without them. I was supposed to get a new pair last year, but I didn't." "We'll get that sorted," Recovery Girl reassured her. "Don't worry about it right now." 10:02 a.m. End of examination. Izumi stood and pulled the gown back on, a quiet weariness settling over her. She felt exposed, vulnerable in a way that she hadn't in years. The feeling lingered even as she walked toward the door, but she wasn't alone anymore. Not with Himiko and Hitoshi standing by, their eyes soft with concern. As they left the examination room, Izumi's hand brushed against the gramophone in the hallway. It was just a small touch, but it brought her a sense of comfort. The weight of it reminded her that while her past may be filled with scars, she didn't have to carry them alone anymore. The Midoriya siblings were all in this together, and together, they would face whatever came next. Time, 10:15 a.m. Location, U.A., High School Medical Wing, Recovery Girl's office. Izumi Midoriya leaned back against the examination table, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the edge of her gown. Recovery Girl had left for a moment to retrieve some additional equipment, leaving Izumi alone in the sterile, quiet room. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above her head, the hum barely audible but still present, almost oppressive. Her eyes roamed around the room, focusing on nothing in particular as her mind wandered. The faintest flicker of a memory slipped past the defenses she'd carefully built over the years. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a brief moment, the cold clinical setting of you faded away. The room twisted and warped, as though the walls themselves were closing in on her. Her eyes closed, and the familiar sound of a crack loud and sharp echoed in her ears. Flashback time, 3:32 p.m. Location, Yakuza warehouse, abandoned lot. 1 year ago. Izumi stood rigid, her back against the cold concrete wall of the warehouse, her wrists bound above her head with thick, coarse rope. Her body was covered in bruises, the evidence of countless beatings. Her hair hung limp and matted, strands of crimson clinging to her skin, but her gaze remained sharp, unyielding. She had to be strong, for her family, her siblings. Himiko was kneeling just a few feet away, her hands bound tightly in front of her. She trembled, her eyes wide and filled with fear, her lips quivering. Hitoshi stood beside her, just as bound and terrified, but the expression on his face was one of quiet fury, something Izumi knew she'd see in him as long as he lived. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. Izumi's heart pounded in her chest, every muscle in her body tight with anticipation, but her expression remained as calm as she could muster. She had been through worse. This was nothing new. The voices of the men who surrounded them, those monsters from the Yakuza, carried through the dim, harshly lit room, their laughter laced with malice. "Look at her thinking she can protect them," one of the Yakuza members sneered, his voice low and dangerous. "We should have done this years ago." Izumi didn't respond. She didn't need to. She had long ago accepted her role in this twisted family. She was the shield, the protector. They had used her like a tool, a weapon, a sacrifice. But that was all she was ever good for. A man in a black suit approached her, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the silence, carrying with it a sense of finality. His face was obscured by a mask, but she knew who he was. His reputation preceded him. He was the enforcer, the one sent when someone needed to be made an example of. Izumi held her ground, not allowing her gaze to falter. But inside, a storm was brewing. She had no fear left. She had spent years burying it, suppressing it beneath layers of steel. But that didn't make it any easier when the man raised his WHP, his fingers tightening around the hilt as he prepared for the inevitable. "This will teach you to protect them." The man's voice was cold, devoid of any empathy. It was as though he spoke about nothing more than an animal, nothing more than an object. Himiko's voice broke the silence. "No, please no." Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried all the desperation she had in her heart. "Izumi, don't. Don't do this." Izumi's eyes flicked toward Himiko, just in time to see the tears strkng down her face, her gaze full of horror. But Izumi's expression remained stoic, determined. "It's okay, Himiko," she whispered, though the words seemed foreign to her, hollow in her throat. "I'm here. I'll protect you." And then the WHP came down. The first lash hit her across the back with a sickening crack, a sharp, bone-rattling sound that echoed in the cavernous space. The pain was immediate, overwhelming. It tore through her, radiating outward from the point of impact. Izumi gritted her teeth to stifle a scream, but it still ripped from her throat. She felt the searing heat of the wound, felt the blood spurt from the gash. But there was no time for pain, no time for weakness. She had to endure. The second lash came almost immediately, followed by a third, a fourth, and then a fifth. Each crack of the WHP was louder, more brutal than the last. Her skin split open under the force of each strike, blood soaking into the fabric of her gown and spilling onto the concrete floor. The air in the room grew thick with the coppery scent of her blood, but she barely noticed. Her focus was on Himiko. Himiko's cries were the only thing she could hear, the sound of her sister's voice cracking under the strain of it all. "No. Stop. Please, stop." But Izumi didn't answer. She couldn't. Not when the pain was so sharp, so intense. The Yakuza members watched on, their grins wide as they reveled in the spectacle. One of them laughed a hollow, twisted sound. "She'll break. Just wait. She can't take much more." But Izumi didn't break. She couldn't. Not when Himiko needed her. The WHP came down again, and Izumi gasped, her vision swimming. Her body was shaking now, her knees barely holding her up. The rope that bound her wrists dug into her skin, adding to the agony. But she didn't scream. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. The sixth strike landed on her shoulder, the force knocking her off balance, sending her crashing to the floor. Blood pooled around her, a river of crimson staining the concrete. Her breath came in ragged gasps, the world spinning as her vision blurred. She could barely hold herself up, but she managed to lift her head. Himiko, her voice was barely a whisper, barely audible, but it was enough. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. And then the WHP cracked again. Izumi snapped back to the present, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Her back burned, a phantom pain that made her flinch. The sterile white walls of U.A.'s medical wing swam back into focus, but her heart still raced, the aftershocks of that memory still reverberating through her body. She felt dizzy. As though the room was closing in on her. Her vision swam, and she had to blink rapidly to clear the fog. The sound of the door opening broke her from the depths of the memory. She turned to see Recovery Girl re-entering the room, her expression unreadable but concerned. Izumi. Recovery Girl asked softly, noticing the pale color of her face and the cold sweat on her skin. Are you all right? Izumi swallowed hard and wiped her brow, taking a few shaky breaths to steady herself. She couldn't let herself break down here, not in front of Recovery Girl, not in front of anyone. Yeah. I'm fine, she muttered, forcing herself to sit up straighter. Just a bit of a headache, is all. Recovery Girl studied her for a moment, but she didn't press. Instead, she simply nodded. All right then. We'll finish this quickly. We still have your siblings to check up on. Izumi nodded absently, her mind still swirling with the weight of the past, but she knew she had to keep moving forward. She couldn't let herself fall apart, not here, not now. She had to stay strong. For Himiko. For Hitoshi. For herself. Silent Pawns, Loud Hearts Time, 11:47 p.m. Location, U. High School, Administration Wing. The halls of U. were silent, the world outside cloaked in midnight shadow. A pale moon hung high in the sky, spilling silver light across the campus grounds and through the windows of the prestigious school's labyrinthine interior. Every creak of the floorboards echoed like a gunshot in the silence. Every shift of the wind rattled against the windows like distant whispers. And yet, through this tension and quiet, two figures moved with practiced grace, silent, determined, and cloaked in the comfort of familiarity. Izumi Midoriya crouched beside a maintenance panel, one hand clutching a small flashlight that had been modified with red film to preserve night vision. Dressed in black cargo pants, a hoodie, and fingerless gloves, she looked more like a seasoned infiltrator than a student. Her partially bandaged left eye gleamed dimly in the low light, scanning the hallway ahead. Beside her, Himiko Midoriya grinned mischievously, her sharp canines catching the glow of the flashlight. She had tied her long blonde hair into a messy braid and wore a faded black bomber jacket patched with bits of cloth that didn't match clearly hand-sewn repairs. In her ear was a small earpiece, crackling with soft static. You sure about this? Izumi muttered, her voice low, wary. Breaking into Nizu's office isn't exactly low risk. You're forgetting something, Himiko whispered, tapping her earpiece. We're not alone. That's what I'm afraid of, Izumi replied, casting a glance at her sister. Who is this mouse person again? Himiko smiled fondly, that rare, vulnerable expression that only surfaced in fleeting moments. You'll like her. She's careful. Methodical. Paranoid. She leaned in conspiratorially. And the only reason I passed advanced encryption theory when the Yakuza had me studying surveillance systems. Before Izumi could respond, a new voice crackled to life in both of their ears. You're 30 meters from the admin security checkpoint. Motion detectors are blind on the east side for the next 6 minutes, don't waste it, came a soft, synthetic voice distorted through a voice modulator. Izumi's eyes narrowed. That her? Mouse, Himiko said with a grin. Real name's May. That handsome kid in support. Shoo. Himiko put a finger to her lips. Nobody knows that except me. And now you. So this, May, she's your hacker and your girlfriend? Izumi asked dryly as they moved. Himiko's expression turned a shade warmer. Almost 3 years. She's the one who taught me how to bypass facial recognition systems and flirt at the same time. Izumi chuckled faintly, the sound more real than anything she'd made in days. Color me impressed. Location, Nizu's office, East Admin Wing time, 12:06 a.m. The lock on Principal Nizu's office was biometric, encrypted with 3-factor authorization, a level of protection befitting one of Japan's most brilliant minds. But the door clicked open quietly after only 6 seconds of work. "You're welcome," Mouse's voice purred in their ears. I cloned Nizu's retinal pattern from the camera records and tricked the local node into thinking it was 10:14 a.m. Time windows small. You've got 10 minutes before logs start syncing again. Show off, Himiko whispered affectionately as the door eased open. The office was as eccentric as its owner. Bookshelves towered over the walls, overflowing with literature, puzzles, and framed degrees. Half-built mechanical puzzles rested on a cluttered desk, and a teapot sat on a warming plate near a chair far too large for Nizu's diminutive frame. Izumi didn't stop to gawk. She made her way to the central computer console, crouching beside it while Himiko carefully closed the door and locked it again from the inside. "You sure this is going to work?" Izumi asked as she slid into Nizu's oversized chair. "It'll work," Himiko said, confidence blazing. "Mouse wouldn't lead us into a trap." "Let's hope not," Izumi muttered. The monitor blinked on, casting the room in an eerie white glow. Almost instantly, lines of green code began to scroll across the screen, commands being input remotely. "There we go," Mouse said through the earpiece. "You're in the main admin roster now. Class assignments are under the 1A, 1B, and 1C sections." The girls watched as files opened and windows rearranged themselves. Izumi scanned the records until she found the one that chilled her. BLD Midoriya, Izumi, assigned class, 1A Midoriya, Himiko, assigned class, 1B Midoriya, Hitoshi, assigned class, 1C. Izumi's fists clenched. "He separated us." "Why?" Himiko said, frowning. "Probably thought it would help us integrate better, or something," Izumi replied, voice low and bitter. "Split us up, dilute the damage. Keep us manageable." "Not happening," Himiko growled. "We survived hell together. We're not splitting up because some rat with a clipboard thinks it's therapeutic." "Rewriting assignments now," Mouse said. "Putting all 3 of you into Class 1A. I'll modify the psychological profile notes to reflect a special sibling integration clause and draft a therapist's recommendation." Izumi blinked. "You really thought of everything, didn't you?" "I'm very protective of my girlfriend's family," came Mouse's response, a faint smile in her voice. Lines of text scrolled again, faster than the eye could follow. Documents autofilled, time-stamped. Verified. It was surgical. Done. Nizu won't even realize it until weeks later, and by then it'll be too late to adjust placements without administrative backlash, Mouse said. He'll write it off as a data processing error. That's the beauty of bureaucracy. Izumi leaned back, letting out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "I owe you one." "You owe me nothing," Mouse replied. "But if you're offering, maybe you can convince Himiko to let me install a grappling hook in her forearm." "Mouse," Himiko groaned. "Kidding. Mostly." A flicker of warmth passed between the sisters. Even in the darkest moments, there were still sparks of connection, of humanity. And for tonight, those sparks were enough. "We should go," Izumi said. "Before someone realizes we're not in bed." "Escape paths already mapped," Mouse confirmed. "West Maintenance Tunnel. Elevators off. Crawl space only. You'll be back in the dorms in 15. As they left the office, sealing the door behind them, Izumi turned to Himiko, eyes curious. "You really love her, huh?" Himiko smiled faintly, eyes distant. "She's the only person outside of you and Hitoshi who ever saw me not as a weapon. Just as me." Izumi nodded, a small but genuine smile tugging at her lips. Then she's a keeper. Location, dormitories, Midoriya sibling sweet time, 12:44 a.m. Izumi climbed into bed slowly, her body aching from both the earlier examination and the emotional fatigue of the night. She adjusted her blankets and stared up at the ceiling. All three of us in the same class, she whispered to herself. Together, again. For once, things felt like they were turning in their favor. But somewhere, far above, behind a wall of security logs and artificial intelligence, a blinking icon marked an unusual file modification. And somewhere behind that, a pair of sharp, intelligent eyes watched the log flicker and smiled. Time, 9:12 a.m. Location, High School, Counseling Wing, Room B12. The morning sun crept lazily over High School, casting sharp light through the tinted windows of the counseling wing. In contrast to the high-tech splendor of the rest of the school, Room B12 was deceptively plain, beige walls, a padded carpet that muffled steps, and a single reinforced, one-way mirror dominating the far side of the room. It didn't look like a classroom. It didn't look like an office. It looked like an observation room in a psychiatric ward. And that, Izumi thought grimly, was probably by design. She sat in one of the three chairs arranged in a tight circle, her arms crossed, her posture stiff and guarded. A long-sleeved, black uniform shirt covered most of her bandages, and she wore her pants tucked into laced boots. Her gaze was razor-sharp, scanning every inch of the room like it might explode. To her right, Hitoshi Midoriya slouched with his arms folded across his chest, legs sprawled out in a casual defiance. The dark circles under his eyes were heavier than usual. He hadn't said much since breakfast, and even then, it was only to mutter, "Why the hell did we agree to this?" Hitoshi had a calm, dry sort of anger, the kind that built up like steam behind a wall. He hadn't snapped yet. But it was clear he could. And then there was Himiko, lounging like a cat in the third chair with her arms dangling over the sides. She hummed softly to herself as if the situation amused her, though every now and then, her eyes flicked to the one-way mirror with an unmistakable note of wariness. "How long are they going to keep us waiting?" Hitoshi asked, tone low. "It's part of the power play," Izumi answered. "Establish control. Make us uncomfortable. See how we act when cornered. So therapy by psychological warfare." "Exactly." The door clicked open. A woman entered, a professional in her early 40s with silver-streaked black hair, dressed in a slate blue pantsuit. She had kind eyes, but her aura carried the weight of authority. Behind her glasses, her gaze was sharp, curious. "Good morning," she said warmly, closing the door behind her. "My name is Dr. Kureha Yamada. You may call me Dr. Yamada, or just Kureha if you prefer. I specialize in trauma-informed behavioral therapy and interfamily recovery." None of the siblings answered. Himiko blinked once and tilted her head, mimicking a doll. Dr. Yamada didn't miss a beat. "This session is mandatory as per the special adjustment clause filed under the amended class placements for 1A. You'll attend these twice a week. Today's session is informal. No diagnostics, no assessments. Just introductions." "Introductions," Hitoshi repeated flatly. "You want us to sit in a circle and trauma dump?" "Only if you want to," she said easily, settling into a fourth chair. "Let me be clear, I won't force you to talk. I'm not here to punish or expose you. I'm here to listen. I understand you've all experienced extensive hardship." Izumi's jaw clenched. Himiko gave a small laugh. "You don't even know the half of it." Dr. Yamada nodded. "Then tell me whatever half you're willing to share." A beat of silence passed. Then, unexpectedly, Izumi spoke. "We were children," she said quietly. "When they took us. I was 6. Himiko was 6. Hitoshi had just turned 7. Hitoshi's hands curled slightly into fists. "The people who raised us after that weren't heroes. They were monsters. They trained us to kill, lie, infiltrate. I've torn out throats. Himiko's poisoned people in their sleep. Hitoshi was a handler by the time he was 10. And the worst part. She looked up, her face calm but hollow. We were good at it. The silence in the room grew heavy. Dr. Yamada didn't speak. She let the weight of Izumi's words settle. You think this little group talk is going to fix that? Hitoshi asked, not unkindly. We're not broken toys waiting for a repairman. No, Yamada said quietly. You're not. But you're also not beyond healing. Himiko chuckled again. You're really optimistic, document. Not optimism, Yamada replied. Patience. And respect. She looked at each of them in turn. Izumi. Himiko. Hitoshi. You're not in the shadows anymore. Isn't just giving you a desk in a dorm room. They're giving you a chance. But that doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. That means learning how to live after. Izumi's hand twitched slightly. Tell me, Yamada said gently. What's the one thing you miss most about before? Himiko tilted her head. Before we were taken. Yamada nodded. Izumi frowned. Her throat tightened. My mom, she said finally. Her voice was smaller than anyone in the room had ever heard. She used to make katsudon on Sundays. I was always excited for it. She said I lit up like a firecracker. She's still alive, Yamada said softly. Izumi didn't answer. Hitoshi looked down. I used to draw. Not good stuff. Just dumb little things. Stick figures. I liked coming up with weird Quirk ideas and pretending they were real. Do you still draw? He shrugged. Doesn't feel like me anymore. Himiko stared at the ceiling. Her voice, when it came, was surprisingly distant. I liked swings, she whispered. Just being on a swing. High up. Feeling like I was flying. I haven't done that since she stopped. None of them spoke for several moments. Grief, Yamada finally said, doesn't end. It changes shape. It becomes a part of us. But it doesn't have to own us. She leaned forward slightly. I don't want you to forget what you've been through. But I do want to help you find who you are now. Not just who they made you. Izumi's gaze finally met hers. There was something cautious in her expression. Not trust, but perhaps consideration. We're not good at normal, she said. Good, Yamada replied. Because the world needs people who understand the abnormal. Who've been through fire and came out stronger. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to show up. Keep showing up. The chime of a clock signaled the end of the session. Yamada stood. Same time next week. Unless you prefer something different. I'm flexible. We can do art therapy. EMDR. Group walks. Even no talking sessions. This is your space. I'll work around you. She paused at the door. And for what it's worth, I'm glad the three of you were placed together. You need each other. Then she was gone. The room was quiet again. Well, Himiko said after a moment, she didn't totally SCK. Hitoshi gave a dry laugh. She's better than our last therapist. The one that tried to hypnotize us. I stabbed that guy, Himiko noted proudly. Izumi, for the first time that day, smiled. First day the morning sun was still rising as the Midoriya siblings slowly made their way through UA's sprawling campus. Despite the initial excitement that had thrummed through their veins when they'd first entered the school, the reality of their situation was sinking in. It was their first day in Class 1A. Izumi, Himiko, and Hitoshi walked side by side, their eyes scanning the towering halls of U that had been so familiar in rumors and media, but now felt strange to step into themselves. This was the beginning of something they hadn't fully prepared for, at least, not mentally. "We're gonna be late," Hitoshi muttered as they quickened their pace, glancing down at his watch. "There's no way we'll make it on time at this rate." Izumi rolled her eyes but didn't pick up the pace. She wasn't worried. They couldn't be expelled. They'd been promised that. "Relax," she said with a soft chuckle. "They can't expel us, remember. Not without breaking their word." "Doesn't mean we should be disrespectful," Himiko added, grinning mischievously. "Besides, who wants to be the first ones late on their first day? I bet there's a whole crowd waiting for us to screw up." The siblings had finished breakfast in the dorm's dining area a little too leisurely, lingering over their food as if they had all the time in the world. It wasn't their fault that breakfast tasted so much better when there was no fear of running out of time, something they'd never been allowed before. It was a new kind of freedom, and they weren't sure how to embrace it yet. As they finally neared the door to the classroom, Izumi could feel the familiar sense of expectation in the air. She couldn't help but feel like they were walking into some sort of test, but she shrugged off the feeling. "I'll knock," Izumi muttered, preparing herself for the inevitable awkwardness of being late. "It's not like anyone will care," Hitoshi said, his voice dry. "Not when they know who we are." Izumi nodded, her mouth quirking in a half-smile. "Yeah. Let's make an entrance, then." Himiko was already halfway to the door, hand hovering over the knob. Her eyes sparkled with playful defiance. "You know, it'll be funny to watch their faces when they realize we were the last ones to arrive." "Yeah," Hitoshi said, "if by funny, you mean disastrous." Before Izumi could respond, the door swung open, and they entered. The classroom instantly fell silent, the students' eyes snapping toward the trio. Izumi felt every gaze on them, but she remained unfazed. It wasn't new, and it wasn't unwelcome either. She was used to being noticed. In the back of the room, one of the students caught her attention. He was staring at her with a mixture of recognition and wariness, his expression tightening just slightly as their eyes met. Izumi's gaze flicked over him, tall, red spiky hair, strong build, and a posture that screamed confidence. She didn't know him, but something about the way he looked at her seemed familiar. She didn't show it, but there was a subtle shift in her expression, just enough to signal that she was aware of him. Kirishima's mind, no. It can't be her. She can't be the one. Kirishima's heart dropped as his eyes locked on Izumi. For a brief moment, he was paralyzed with the weight of memories rushing back to him, his mother's soft sobs when his father's gambling debts had torn apart their family, the months they'd spent scraping by, desperate for any means of survival. The woman he saw now was the same one who had appeared at his mother's lowest point, forcing her into PRSTTN to pay off his father's debts. But what was she doing here? Why was she sitting there, with that calm, almost indifferent look on her face? His mind raced. He had no concrete proof of her involvement, just his mother's broken recollections and fragmented memories of her appearance. There was no way of knowing for sure if it was really her, yet the coincidences were too much to ignore. But he couldn't act on it. Not yet. Not without evidence. Kirishima swallowed the bile rising in his throat, his hands clenching into fists under the table. He kept his gaze locked on Izumi, his heart pounding faster than it ever had before. He couldn't bring it up, at least not now, not in front of everyone. His mother had always told him to stay strong. That's what he'd have to do now. Izumi didn't know what he was thinking. She was too focused on their entrance and the uncomfortable silence that stretched across the room as they walked to the desk. She could sense something in the air, though, a tightness, a hesitancy. She caught a glimpse of the clock on the wall. They were barely 5 minutes late. Izumi gave a half-smile, feeling the weight of their late arrival already lift as she casually dropped into the seat nearest the window. "So, this is where we'll be sitting. Lucky us." Himiko bounced into the seat next to her, not at all bothered by the stairs. "Wow. I can't believe we're finally here." Hitoshi, as usual, sat a little farther away, his posture relaxed but his gaze sharp. He threw a glance at the teacher who had yet to make an appearance. The class was filled with whispers, but it wasn't until a moment later that the door opened again, and Aizawa entered the room. His usual tired gaze swept over the class before it landed on the Midoriya trio. "Alright, I hope everyone has gotten to know each other. We've got some big things ahead of us. And yes, the Midoriya siblings will be staying in this class. I don't care if you're uncomfortable. We've all got our demons. Just don't let their past affect your performance." Izumi's brow raised slightly. "Demons, huh?" she muttered to herself. Her eyes flicked to Himiko, who grinned in return. The day proceeded much like any other first day, with introductions and class schedules being passed around. But as the hours stretched on, Izumi couldn't help but notice Kirishima's discomfort whenever their gazes met. He kept his distance, and though he tried to be polite, there was something unsettling about the way he looked at her. It was like he knew something and she wasn't sure if that made her uncomfortable or intrigued. The lunch bell rang, signaling the end of their first official PRD. The class slowly began to shuffle toward the cafeteria, but before Izumi could rise from her seat, she was approached by Kirishima, who stood awkwardly in front of her desk. "Hey," he said, his voice somewhat strained. Izumi looked up at him, an eyebrow raised, but she didn't say anything. You wouldn't happen to know a woman by the name of Tora Kirishima, would you?" Kirishima asked carefully, his voice low enough to avoid attention but still laced with uncertainty. Izumi's gaze sharpened. Tora Kirishima. She had heard the name. But she didn't recognize the connection. She gave him an inscrutable look, making sure her expression was neutral. "Sorry, I don't know a Tora." She paused, her eyes scanning his face carefully. "You sure you've got the right person?" Kirishima hesitated, but then he gave a small nod, despite the unease in his chest. "Yeah. I must have confused you with someone else. My mistake." Izumi smiled faintly. "No problem." With that, Kirishima backed off, leaving Izumi alone with her thoughts. As the day drew to a close, Izumi couldn't shake the feeling that Kirishima's question was far from random. Something about it had struck a chord, and despite her casual demeanor, she knew he was hiding something. The question lingered, but for now, she would let it go. They were still on a delicate line, balancing their dangerous pasts with their new lives here at UA. The only question left was just how much longer they could keep their secrets from unraveling. The last bell of the day rang, signaling that the first official class of the year was over. Despite the tension that still lingered from the late entrance and the stares they'd gotten, the Midoriya siblings walked out of the classroom, more relaxed than they'd been in a long time. They hadn't made any major blunders, and they'd managed to make it through their first day without being sent to the principal's office or causing any massive disruptions. Aizawa, however, had other plans. "Alright, students," Aizawa's voice cut through the buzz of conversation as he stood by the door, his tired eyes scanning the class. "Today is your first real test. You'll be doing a Quirk apprehension test. I'll give you more details once you're dressed and ready. Until then, head to the locker rooms and get changed." The students exchanged uncertain looks. The idea of a test this early seemed harsh, but no one questioned it. After all, they had all been accepted into U, for a reason. "Don't take too long," Aizawa added before turning and heading toward the gym. The Midoriya siblings lingered for a moment, taking in the implications of the test. They knew they couldn't hold back. Not after everything they'd been through. "Let's go," Izumi muttered, leading the way toward the locker rooms. Girls' locker room. The girls' locker room was busy with chatter as the students began to change into their athletic uniforms. A few of the girls seemed nervous about the upcoming test, while others were already talking about the prospect of impressing their teachers with their abilities. Himiko and Izumi had slipped into the changing area together, each quietly undressing and putting on the standard athletic uniform. The tension from the earlier silence was now replaced by the gentle hum of girls discussing everything from which quirk they were most excited to use to their thoughts on Aizawa. As they changed, a few of the girls couldn't help but notice the tattoos that adorned the siblings' bodies. Izumi and Himiko had never been the type to hide their marks, which were quite visible on their arms and upper bodies, especially when they were in the loose athletic uniforms. One of the girls, a bright-eyed brunette with short hair and a nervous demeanor, stared at Himiko's arm where a dragon tattoo wrapped around her forearm. "Whoa," she whispered under her breath. "Is that a tattoo? It looks so intricate." Himiko, ever the playful one, grinned widely as she slid on her sneakers. "Yep. Pretty cool, huh?" The girl blinked, her mouth forming a small O. "But, aren't tattoos illegal? I mean, most people only get them if they're in Yakuza, right?" She looked uncertain, glancing at Izumi and then back to Himiko. Izumi, who was lacing up her own shoes, simply shrugged. "Guess it's true. People do tend to assume that. But we're not the typical kind of people you'd see here, so, don't worry about it." "Wait, what kind of tattoos do you have?" another girl asked, curious and a bit more bold now. She had noticed the black ink running down Izumi's neck and trailing off to the back of her shoulders. Izumi lifted the sleeve of her shirt slightly, revealing a large, complex tattoo of a serpent coiled around a sword. It was far more noticeable than Himiko's design, but no one seemed to say much beyond quiet gasps. The girl blinked, trying to gather her words. "That's pretty intense." "Yeah, it's a family thing," Himiko said nonchalantly, glancing at Izumi and then shrugging. "Nothing special. Just a tradition. You know how it goes with families." Izumi didn't flinch. She didn't want to share much more, but the tattoo was part of who they were, part of their past. The design was meaningful. It was her past, her family. Before the conversation could continue, another girl, a petite one with purple hair, stepped forward, clearly intrigued but still somewhat unsure about continuing the topic. "Do you guys ever, get questioned about them?" Izumi's eyes hardened slightly as she finished tying her shoes, glancing at Himiko to see if she was going to intervene. But Himiko simply shrugged, as if daring the girls to ask questions. "Sometimes," Izumi said, her voice laced with a soft but unmistakable coldness. "But it doesn't really matter what people think, does it? People can believe what they want. We know the truth." The tension that followed was enough to make the other girls retreat into their own thoughts, and the conversation quickly shifted. No one said much more about tattoos after that, but the air felt slightly more charged. Boys' locker room. Meanwhile, in the boys' locker room, the atmosphere was no less tense, though it had a slightly different vibe. The boys of Class 1A had quickly gotten changed, exchanging their own stories about how they'd gotten into UA, or what they expected from the upcoming test. Kirishima was one of the last to change, his gaze constantly flickering toward the tattoos on Hitoshi's arms. They were large, dark, and undeniably intricate, running all the way from his shoulders down to his hands. It wasn't the size that disturbed Kirishima. He'd seen tattoos before, after all, but the weight of them, the way they marked a person's life in ways words never could. Hitoshi was adjusting his clothes, a casual air about him despite the tension he could feel from Kirishima's stares. Kirishima, now fully dressed and standing in front of his locker, still couldn't shake the unsettling feeling in his stomach. His eyes kept darting back to Hitoshi's tattoos as his thoughts began to twist and cloud with suspicion. He didn't know why, but something about those tattoos felt too familiar. Something his mom had said, a passing comment about a person who had forced her into that life. The patterns on Hitoshi's arms reminded him of the stories his mother had whispered about the people who had hurt her. For a moment, he froze, his breath catching in his throat. The tattoos, the way they were placed, it looked just like her. The woman who had been at the center of his mother's suffering, the one who had taken everything from them. Could it be the same person? Could this be the woman who had forced his mother into PRSTTN all those years ago? Hitoshi, noticing Kirishima's discomfort, glanced up. His dark eyes narrowed, studying Kirishima for a moment, though his face remained unreadable. He hadn't missed the way the redhead's gaze lingered on his tattoos. But before either could say anything, a voice rang out from across the room. "Alright, you guys." It was Aizawa's voice, sharper than usual, signaling it was time to head toward the gym. "Quit the stalling. Move it." Kirishima turned away from Hitoshi, the knot in his chest tightening. He couldn't bring it up now, not here, not without proof. But the question lingered in the back of his mind, gnawing at him. "Yeah. Sure." He forced a smile, shaking his head to rid himself of the thoughts that were circling around his brain. "Let's go. We don't want to be late." As the group made their way out of the locker room and toward the gym, Kirishima couldn't shake the weight of his suspicions. Something told him the answers were just beyond reach, waiting to unravel in front of him. But for now, he had to focus on what was at hand on the test that was about to begin. Quirk apprehension test. The sun blazed down on you, heist training field, illuminating Class 1A as they stood in a neat line, clad in matching navy blue gym uniforms. The air was dry, the kind that clung to skin and made every breath feel like it carried the promise of something strange. Off to the side stood Aizawa, his familiar scowl carved into his tired features. Oddly enough, from the moment they'd stepped outside, a song had started to play. Bamboleo, Bambolia, porque mi vida yo la prefiero vivir así. The lively flamenco chords of Bamboleo by the Gypsy Kings wafted mysteriously through the air, echoing through the training field. There were no visible speakers. No phones. Nothing. It just was. Some students glanced around in confusion, while others started tapping their feet to the catchy rhythm. No one could figure out where it was coming from. Not even Aizawa. "Alright," the homeroom teacher announced, arms crossed, eyes barely open. "We're beginning the Quirk apprehension test. You've all done this in middle school, but this time, you can use your quirks. We're going to see what you're really capable of. You'll each perform in a series of physical tests, starting with the softball throw." He tossed a standard softball toward Izumi, who caught it with a smooth flick of her wrist. A soft clink rang as the ball hit her leather glove. "Midoriya," Aizawa said, "you got the top score on the written entrance exam. Let's see what you've got in the field." Izumi stepped forward, hat low over her face and her left eye concealed behind the black eye patch. Her boots crunched softly on the dirt, a steady, deliberate gait as she moved past her classmates to the designated throwing circle. The moment hung still. The music played louder. Bamboleo, Bambolia, she tilted her head back to roll her neck, a subtle pop of joints audible as she flexed her throwing arm. Then, gripping the softball tight, she pivoted on her heel and hurled it with a forceful snap of her whole body. The ball screamed through the air, hurtling a good distance across the field, farther than most expected for someone without a strength-enhancing quirk. But Izumi wasn't finished. With a fluid motion born from hundreds of hours of practice, she reached into the holster strapped to her hip, drew one of her custom Remington new model army revolvers, pegged the hammer, and crack. The first shot rang out like thunder. The ball jerked forward in the sky. Crack. 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 6 shots. 6 perfect hits. Each bullet caught the ball midair, propelling it farther and farther in stuttering, explosive bursts. The crowd stared, stunned into silence. Finally, the ball dropped beyond the field's horizon. A split second later, the distant clunk of it landing echoed through the silence. Izumi slowly reholstered the revolver, empty cylinder clicking open for inspection before she flipped it shut again. She turned without a word and walked back to the line. The students parted for her like water. "She doesn't even have a quirk," Mina whispered, her pink skin looking paler than usual. "That was all pure technique," Momo finished, visibly impressed. Shoto Todoroki's eyes followed Izumi silently, unreadable. Bakugo scowled but said nothing. Even Aizawa blinked once. "Well, it's not the furthest I've ever seen, but that was creative," he muttered, tapping on the device in his hand. Marked. The test continued. 50-meter dash. Izumi's long legs carried her smoothly down the track, her strides calculated. She didn't win. Tenya Ida claimed that honor with his engine Quirk, but she finished fast enough to raise a few eyebrows. Himiko sprinted like a rabid fox, eyes wide with glee, matching Bakugu's speed for a few meters before laughing and slowing down. Bambolia, the music was still playing. Grip strength test. Izumi knew this wouldn't be her best event, but she gave it her all, clenching the grip strength meter and gritting her teeth. The result was above average, nothing superhuman, but enough to show she'd spent years training every inch of her body. Hitoshi wasn't far behind, though he underperformed with little fanfare. Still, no one mocked him. Not after seeing his tattoos. Side-to-side jumps during the footwork drills, Izumi moved with a dancer's grace, keeping her center of gravity low and her balance sharp. Her breath was steady even as she twisted and turned, the wind catching her loose sleeves, briefly exposing a fragment of a coiling serpent inked into her ribs. Kirishima, across from her, froze. Just a glimpse, but it was enough. His world went still. That tattoo. He remembered it vividly. The ink that wrapped around his mother's thigh like a vice. The same design. The same art. The woman who had spoken in hushed tones to his mother, wearing that same hat, voice like cold steel. A monster dressed like a gunslinger. His fists clenched. Bamboleo, seated toe touch and sit ups. Izumi breezed through flexibility and endurance drills, never panting, never breaking rhythm. If anyone watched closely, they'd see the years of conditioning, military-style precision, breath work, and pain tolerance forged through long winters and rough summers. Hitoshi worked beside her, matching her core exercises rep for rep. Neither said anything. But both knew they didn't need to. They were forged from the same fire. Long jump. Launching herself forward, Izumi tucked and rolled at the end to absorb the impact. Her hat never even shifted. Mineta, meanwhile, tripped mid-jump and face-planted into the sand. No one laughed. Not with the music still playing. Porque mi vida, yo la prefiero, vivir así. Endurance run. As the students jogged laps around the field, Izumi maintained a calm, even pace. Her revolvers bounced gently at her hips. Her breathing was measured, calculated. Kirishima kept a few paces behind her the whole time, glaring silently, his knuckles cracking. He knew now. He remembered her name. Her tattoo. Her eyes. He didn't have proof. But he knew. He would bide his time. Closing moments. As the test concluded, Aizawa took his notes, the song still echoing mysteriously through the air like the ghost of a forgotten festival. The students stood in loose groups, catching their breath and discussing the test. That was insane, Kaminari mumbled, still stunned. I mean, the gun thing, who does that? Izumi Midoriya, Jiru said softly, eyes narrowed. She's not normal. None of us are, Ida replied. But she's different. Izumi stood a few meters away from the group, watching the horizon where the softball had disappeared. Her revolver's chamber was empty. She spun it with a flick of her wrist before sliding it back into the holster. Himiko bounded over and threw an arm around her shoulders. We rocked that, didn't we? Izumi didn't answer. Her single visible eye remained fixed on the sky. Bambolia, somewhere, the song played on. The sun hung low, casting a golden hue over the training grounds as Class 1A gathered in front of Aizawa to hear the results of the Quirk apprehension test. The air was thick with anticipation, and the faint hum of wind through the trees was the only sound besides the quiet rustling of uniforms. Izumi, wiping the back of her neck with a towel, stood near the group. The weight of the day's exertion was present in her body, but she stood tall, her posture never wavering. Her hat was perched low over her face, and her left eye, concealed behind the black eye patch, kept hidden the sharpness within her gaze. The music, Bamboleo by the Gypsy Kings, still echoed softly in the background, and although it was a strange, inexplicable occurrence, the students were too preoccupied with the test results to think about it. As Aizawa stood before them, a tablet in hand, he glanced over the list one more time before clearing his throat. Alright, you all performed well. Here are the results for the Quirk apprehension test. His voice was as dry as ever, but there was a distinct lack of his usual indifference. This was important. Their first impression as heroes, especially to him, meant everything. The students leaned in, their eyes flicking toward the teacher, waiting for him to read off the names. First place, Shoto Todoroki. A murmur passed through the class as Todoroki nodded with a faint, almost imperceptible smile. His performance was no surprise, his combination of ice and fire was a formidable asset in almost any exercise. Second place, Tenya Ida. Ida puffed his chest out, nodding fiercely as he adjusted his glasses. Third place, Katsuki Bakugu. Bakugu barely acknowledged his rank, though he couldn't hide the twitch of his lips as if the top spots were rightfully his. Fourth place, Kirishima Eijiro. Kirishima beamed brightly, though it was apparent his pride was tempered by something else. He held his head high, but his mind was elsewhere, focusing on something far more troubling than the results. The list continued, but Kirishima's thoughts lingered on one specific person. Izumi. She hadn't come first. Not even close. She wasn't the best, but the things she'd done, those shots, the way she'd moved like a seasoned warrior, had left an impression.